So that those of you who have not been able to make it live to Dr. Naz's office today, this video is going to be recorded and put on YouTube for you to share with your friends. We just to back up for 1 second, we did talk about the power of lion's mane mushrooms being well researched, and specifically the study in 4 weeks of taking it showing a reduction of depression and anxiety, which just catapults us into this conversation of what else are we missing in nutrition that could be the key that to help us fully experience happiness and joy and vitality and really enjoying life. And I'm not going to go too deep into this next one, but I will say that there's a treasure trove of research out there around omega-3s. And I don't believe that people are getting enough omega-3 fatty acids for their brains. There's an easy way to test this. And there's a simple finger prick test called an omega-3 index. And I don't know if Dr. Naz has access to that or yet or not, but I'm sure she can, and I can definitely connect her to that. But after looking at meta-analyses, meaning multiple studies, the results came down to the fact that they are effective against primary depression, having good omega-3 levels. And without going too much further into this, I always encourage people to do their own research. And this YouTube research can be helpful when it's the right person. And so I always tell people to research Dr. Harris, Harris, omega-3 anxiety, and put that into a YouTube search, and you'll find this little 3-minute video. And in this video, he goes through so much research that shows that there is a relationship between omega-3s and anxiety and depression, showing that the lower the omega-3s that you had, the higher the levels of anxiety and depression. And this isn't just one person. We've got studies upon studies. Columbia University did multiple studies. And I use this because there is that gap we have to cross over first when people don't believe that nutrition has anything to do with their mental health. We have to start with, world-class experts reminding them of this truth that has been known for decades and proven many times. And then the question is, well, why isn't this being part of first-line therapy? Because it's something that occurs in nature. And so there isn't an advocacy group, or there isn't a lobbying group to get this promoted and marketed as well as other products are being marketed. But everybody should know that their omega-3 levels are going to be incredibly important. And I'll say one last thing before I throw it out there for you guys to teach back. Every single day, our bodies replace, and this has been pretty much agreed upon by most scientists of late, somewhere between around 330 billion cells. So in your brain, in your body, everywhere, we are every day taking old cells and replacing them with new cells, to the tune of 330 billion plus or minus 20 billion, depending on how big you are. And every single one of those cells has a wrapper around it called a phospholipid bilayer, meaning half of that lipid, meaning fat. So we cannot effectively replace all of those cells unless we bring in essential, meaning we have to get it from an external source, essential fatty acids to effectively replace all of those. And I truly believe a lot of inflammation, a lot of disease states are truly just due to a lack of supply to be able to effectively replace all of those cells. So we have healthy new cells. Instead, we have dead, sick, and dying cells that aren't getting replaced appropriately. So I did say I was going to pause after each section. So I'm going to pause now. And since we talked about both lion's mane and omega-3 fatty acids, can somebody teach me something back that they heard me say in there that they think is worth repeating, or that somebody else needs to hear, or could be the difference for somebody? Yes, right there in the front row in the red shirt.
So I have a question, but so what I heard you say is it can't be done overnight. You need to do this over a period of time before you can realize any sort of change.
I love that teach back. Absolutely. And I think it's just because we have to make sure that we are giving people appropriate expectations, right, as to how nature works. And we have kind of developed a culture where we want things done yesterday. And we really think that, everything is faster. But unfortunately, we're still a part of nature. And our body can only replace, and it sounds funny, but it can only replace 330 billion cells every day. It can't replace a trillion cells every day. So it will take time for that healing to occur, to be noticeable, and for fortification. So yes, I think she deserves a prize for that.
Right. Yes.
Yes, of course. And we will do questions and answers at the end, but please ask. I'll answer your question now as well.
So is it only lion's mane mushroom? Is it all mushrooms or?
Wonderful question. So there is a vitamin that I talk a lot about, and I have a whole tiny little YouTube video about this called ergothioneine. It's being touted as the longevity vitamin because it's not something our body can make internally. We have to get it from an external source. And we have these seekers of it in our body when we eat that upregulate, saying, hey, are we going to get some of this ergothioneine? Because it reduces oxidative stress tremendously in the brain. The best food source by far of this vitamin L, or longevity, is mushrooms. So a lot of mushrooms are going to give you this value, but some have greater amounts than others. And lion's mane is one of the top mushrooms that have that. Now, the other piece about lion's mane that made me gravitate toward that specific mushroom is the research, but also in that research, as we go back and take a look at that, you're going to see it mentions a very specific thing called aranacines, which comes from the second part of the name, Erinaceus. And these aranacines are unique only to the lion's mane mushroom, and they're very effective at transporting nutrients across the blood-brain barrier, which is always a challenge in nutrition and in medical science, is how do we get things into the brain? Because there's this very powerful protection. But in order to get these nutrients like magnesium, like potassium, like lithium, like zinc, where we need to get it appropriately, having the aranacines deliver that ergothioneine and all of that into the brain, I believe is one of the synergies of nature that really is what we would say 1 + 1 = 4. It really brings a tremendous benefit to have them connected together. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, great. Awesome. Unfortunately, we have very little time, right? So I got to jump into some other stuff that I think is super important. Okay. There are many nutrients that I've discovered are chronically low in the American diet and typically missing in a lot of people's diets. And when it comes to mental health specifically, I definitely want to highlight the importance of vitamin Bs, okay? Not just vitamin B3 or B1 or B6, although I'm going to talk a little bit about B6 here, but also inositol, which is vitamin B8, and folate, which is vitamin B9. We need all of these vitamin Bs for a lot of function in the brain. And there's tremendous amount of research that shows an association with them. But one of my favorite resources to give people is this book called Nutrient Power. Because in science, we need a lot more than just one study or a small study. We need long-term studies with lots of people. And Dr. Walsh, who wrote this book, worked over 35 years and with 30,000 patients with mental health conditions. And after 35 years and 30,000 people, which is a tremendous amount of data, he said that there were 6 things that were most common in the people who were struggling with depression. He talked about copper and zinc, which I'll talk about next. He talked about methylfolate, which I'm definitely going to mention. He talked about oxidative stress. Now, we just talked about how lion's mane mushrooms are tremendous and ergothioneine at reducing oxidative stress and specifically in the brain. So that's really interesting. Amino acid imbalances, because those are the precursors to make our serotonins, our neurotransmitters, our dopamine, all of that. We have to have amino acids. But he also listed in the top 6 a vitamin B6 deficiency. And so the question I would ask is, well, why is that a repeat offender? Well, once you know a little bit more about vitamin B6, you start to learn that the concentrations of vitamin B6 are 100 times higher in the brain than they are in the levels in the blood. And then when you really get deep down into why is that so important, you start to see all of these neurotransmitters. Again, we talk about serotonin, we talk about dopamine, we talk about GABA. These are the things that we need to make sure we feel calm and happy. Without vitamin B6, we cannot either synthesize or convert these into the active forms that you need them. So it stands to reason why there's such a tremendous need for vitamin B6 in the body. You need it to create the enzymes to help you break down the proteins in the first place, but then you need it to convert tryptophan into 5-HTP and then 5-HTP into serotonin. In the simplest terms, I'm saying that without abundant B6, we're never going to get to serotonin. And so I think that we're skipping steps when we're trying to artificially keep serotonin levels high with an antidepressant medication if we haven't first ruled out a B6 deficiency, because we cannot maybe get there without enough vitamin B6. And it's tremendously needed in the body for so many things. And I will point out here, sleep is so important to mental health. Serotonin has to be there for you to have melatonin. You cannot make melatonin in your body without serotonin. And you cannot make serotonin without B6 here and B6 here and B6 here. And even the same thing down here for dopamine. You can't make dopamine without L-DOPA, which you can't make without B6. And you have to have tyrosine to make the L-DOPA. This also is very important for individuals who are taking cognitive medications that are aimed at bringing in more L-DOPA to give people dopamine. This is a big target for Parkinsonianism. Well, if you don't have enough B6, just taking L-DOPA may give you mediocre results because you may likely have a B6 deficiency, so you can't get to dopamine. The same thing for glutamate to GABA. Now, glutamate is that neurotransmitter in their brain that when it's too high, we feel very excited. Our brain works too fast. We're thinking too fast. We're talking too fast. You may think I'm high glutamate right now, and I might be actually because I'm so excited to be here. But we want to be able to convert it to GABA so we can calm down, we can be more connected. But we can't do that without vitamin B6. And so as I go down, I always talk about where is this in the likelihood of it being deficient? And it is a water-soluble vitamin. So deficiency is much more likely. So it should definitely be addressed or ruled out in the cases of all depression and anxiety. And toxicity is very unlikely. In fact, I did some research in the National Institutes of Health, the Office of Dietary Supplements, the vitamin B6 sheet for health for care professionals. And it did say that high intakes of vitamin B6 from food sources, this is very important, getting it from food, can have not been reported to cause adverse effects. Problems only occur after noting that they had the administration of a synthetic form of B6 of 1 to 6 grams for over 12 to 40 months. So you can see why I think it's very important that we look at vitamin B6. Now, just to put one more button on this target, that's vitamin B6, but B9 is folate. And Dr. Walsh does a tremendous job of pointing out the importance of folate. If I were to choose one nutrient for somebody with mental health concerns to focus on first, it would probably be folate, because he shows that those individuals who experience the worst side effects from these medications, the SSRIs, the Prozacs and all of those, are people who are low on folate. So if you have folate deficiency and you have an SSRI, you're increasing the risk of suicidal and homicidal ideation to the maximum. And that's why I want everybody to know how important folate is. Asparagus being one of the best foods to get folate from it. Beans are a wonderful source of folate. Black beans in particular are the foundation for the diets of those people around the world who live the longest in the blue zones. Brussels sprouts are a great source of folate. So if you do know anybody who is struggling with mental health and they are on an antidepressant or they're considering taking one, please just do something to help introduce some more folate into their life as quickly and as frequently as possible. Okay. We'll stop at that section and see what kind of teach back we got there. Because I know what I said, but I never know what people hear. So I want to hear what you heard me say. It was a lot, right? Yes. Thank you in the front row in the white shirt.
So I know that vitamin Bs in general are associated with good mental health, but you were saying in particular, vitamin B6 and folate is correlated. Low correlation is correlated with not being able to process GABA or serotonin or melatonin or 5-HTP. So you need those things. I do have a question though.
Yes.
Is it possible, or is there studies that link the enzymes? You say you need a certain enzyme to convert. Like I take a lot of B complexes. I don't struggle with depression really, but there could be a lack of an enzyme. Has that ever been studied, or do you know anything about that as well, besides just supplementing with those particular vitamins?
Right. Well, I'm a huge advocate of getting my nutrition sources from nature, because nature tends to provide all the cofactors that we need. So I don't typically tell someone to just do a straight vitamin B6 supplement. I would want to make sure you're focusing on foods that contain a lot of vitamin B6. And I do know, I don't know specifically studies that have focused on just the enzymes themselves, but what I focus on is all the chemistry that's required to make all of these enzymes and these conversions. And in the next section, I'll point out the importance of zinc in the being able to utilize and convert vitamin B6 into P5P, which is going to be the active form. So again, it is important to get it in a holistic way. And there are certain foods that are going to deliver these, as I would call them, nature's multivitamins, right? But that's why I would always make sure that we're only supplementing, not, to satisfy our whole body's need for that nutrient. Supplementing literally meaning we're getting as much as we can from the diet, but we need a little emphasis on our weakness. So we're going to bring that in to balance it out. Great teach back. I think she deserves a prize. And for those of you who are watching this from home, make sure you come live next time so you get these prizes, right?
That's right.
All right. Any other questions or feedback on that? Or can I move on to the next section? I've got 2 more to go. Great. Thank you for letting me jump in this next one. This next one's near and dear to my heart. In fact, I created an entire YouTube video specifically about this one, and I'll share that with you as well when I send it to you. But this is specific to women, and it looks like we have a lot of women in the audience here. So, and this is so important for women to know. What Dr. Walsh found when he was looking at all of these micronutrients, you'll notice number 1, he said high copper or hypercupremic depression. And this is on page 83, 84, if you are going to check out this book. And he said about 17%. Now, remember, he was looking at 30,000 people. He said 17% of the depression patients exhibited hypercupremia or high copper in their blood as their dominant chemical imbalance. Now, this is the piece that I want you all, if you're taking notes, to write down. And if you're not taking notes, I still want you to write this down because this is super important. The vast majority of those people, 96% with this biotype, are women, with the first episode of depression typically occurring during a hormonal event like puberty, childbirth, or menopause. So every person you've ever known who has struggled with postpartum depression, for example, or any type of cyclical depression, or depression when they took hormones, we have to let them know that the copper piece is probably a big piece of that puzzle. Copper overloaded people with depression usually reported that the SSRIs, or the antidepressants, will provide some improvement, but it will make their anxiety worse. And high copper females are usually intolerant to birth control pills or hormone replacement therapy, since these treatments increase copper levels in the blood. And that's what everybody needs to know, is that estrogen will mobilize copper in the blood. And we do have quite a big concern in this country with estrogen dominance, no matter how old you are, because we have a lot of things that are contributing to excess estrogen. And most of that has to do with our body not eliminating the excess estrogen. And in the whole seminar, I could get much deeper into this, but I want to bring your attention to this and give you probably the most important piece to be able to help with this. Now, he goes through case studies in here. I'm not going to take the time to do that, but you can get your own levels tested. It's very simple, routine, it's highly reliable, and it's available in many parts of the world, and it's not expensive. You can get your blood copper checked, and you're going to find some very important information. I had my blood levels checked for copper. It's called serum or plasma copper. You can also check for ceruloplasmin. This helps you understand whether or not you have a metal metabolism disorder, like your body has more help getting rid of this copper. And you can also check the serum zinc levels. Okay, if I were to get blood levels checked on myself, if I was concerned about mental health, I would have these 3 checked. And then if you look over here to the left, I would also have the blood folate checked, the serum folate, because remember, that's the most dangerous one if it's too low when people are taking these medications. And you can also check your blood histamine to give you an indication of whether or not you have a folate deficiency, or if you are, now this gets more complicated, a whole other section, but I'm sure you've heard about methylation. It gives you a really good indication of whether you're over-methylating or under-methylating. We hear a lot of people talk about being low methylators or having MTHFR, but what we don't realize is that there's a large percentage of our population who actually are high methylators, and those are the ones who are at greatest risk of the suicidal and homicidal ideation. And this is unfortunate that I do have members of my family that are hypermethylators and did have that result with antidepressants, which led me to obsessively learn about this and want to share with as many people as possible. So again, they talked about zinc, and zinc, it was in every protocol that Dr. Walsh used, no matter what the priority was, whether it was undermethylation, whether it was low folate, whether it was toxic overload, whether it was a pyrrole disorder, it didn't matter. Zinc is always a part of his protocols because most people with elevated blood copper also had low zinc and oxidative stress. And again, after 35 years of research, a database of 3 million blood, urine, and tissue chemistries from 30,000 people diagnosed with mental disorders, he found that zinc deficiency was by far the most frequently observed chemical imbalance in mental health populations. That every person who's struggling with mental health should know. Over 90% of the people diagnosed with depression, behavior disorders, ADHD, autism, schizophrenia, all exhibited depleted plasma zinc levels, meaning in the blood, not even looking at what's in the cells, just what's in the blood, low, normal to severe deficiency. And so there is a zinc taste test. And in the next time I send out some mushrooms to you, Dr. Naz, if you don't already have this, I will send you some of these so that you can do this interactively with everybody. It's a great way to determine whether or not you have adequate zinc in your body. You just hold this solution in your mouth, and then you determine whether or not you have a zinc deficiency. So, on the last note on zinc, since we're short on time here today, as we just mentioned, we talked about vitamin B6 being so important, but you'll notice in every one of those studies, even if B6 was in there, there was also zinc because it is, again, required for the efficient conversion of that dietary B6 into, it's actually P5P, which is the needed for the synthesis of these neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, GABA, all of them. And you also need zinc for all of those neurotransmitters. Okay, well, who's ready to teach something back from that crazy section? I will share while you guys are thinking about it. If you do ever want to repeat this to somebody and you're not sure how to repeat it back to them, I made a 6-minute video where it shows Dr. Walsh's book and the chemistry where you need to take copper to convert dopamine into norepinephrine. But if you have too much copper, you convert too much. And it really explains everything I just went through basically in a succinct manner. And you can find that on my YouTube channel under copper and zinc. But I'll send that to you guys as well so that you have that. All right, questions or teach back? I got somebody in the back, yes, and in the front, but let's go in the back first. Yes.
Just that folate, copper, and zinc are important things to monitor for depression, and that you should get those vitamins or minerals from food, not necessarily from supplements, unless you're severely deficient.
Absolutely. It's so important to get them from balanced foods. I think that's probably one of the most important things. And I forgot to share with you some of these foods, and here they are. Honestly, pumpkin seeds are one of my favorite multivitamins for so many people. It's a great balance of not just zinc and copper, but vitamin Bs. There's so much in there, magnesium. If you look at the bottom here, they are, if you're using them as a nutritional supplement, really, they do need to be organic, because we can't get all the nutrients into them unless they're organic. The killing of the microbiome of the soil does inhibit the micronutrients into the plant. They do need to be raw because the cooking of them also destroys some of the nutrients. And sprouting them makes the micronutrients available even more. In the blue zones where people live the longest and they have the lowest rates of obesity, lowest rates of heart disease, lowest rates of cancer, they eat about a handful of raw nuts and seeds every day. And so the other ones I want to point out are the pecans. Pecans are a great keto food for people who are worried about, the weight gain that they would get from pumpkin seeds. Pumpkin seeds are actually keto as well. Cashews are a little more sugary, so they may not be as keto. And oysters are going to be the other one that I'm going to mention up there. But you can do a quick search online to figure out which foods are going to be the best sources for you. Okay, well, we got one more section, unless you guys are ready to call it a day. And we had a question down there in the front. Yes.
So I don't suffer from depression or anxiety. Does that mean my zinc levels are good?
Very good question. Not necessarily. So nutritional deficiencies are going to express themselves in absolutely different ways in every person because we all have different weaknesses, right? Depending on the weakness in which organ, you may be doing a lot of things for your brain. You may have good community. You may have all these things that are helping keep your mood right. But the zinc may express itself in a different way, right? You may have blood sugar issues because of not enough zinc, or growing up on a farm, we used to always say that if your feet stink, you need more zinc, right? So there's a lot of different things that would give you an indication if your zinc levels aren't great. And it's not like, your zinc levels go and you immediately become depressed. It's just that we want to use, not use it, but we want to be informed from the symptom of depression and anxiety to look at what could possibly be missing. And zinc is probably one of the most important ones you want to make sure is there. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And do we have enough time for me to do my last section, or do we need to wrap this up?
No.
Yes, please.
Okay.
I get enough of you. Please continue.
Well, this last piece is really near and dear to my heart because I was involved with creating a blue zone in Texas and also creating the wellness capital of Texas. My clinic is in Texas. And I learned of this town because they have such tremendous well water. It's called Where America Drinks Its Way to Health. And because of them, I learned that they have a water there that has higher than normal levels of lithium. And I was a little concerned about that because most people, when they hear lithium, they think of lithium batteries or they think of the medication. But what I had come to learn that when we get it from food and when we get it from water, it's a totally different experience. And there's a lot of scientific push around the world to make this an essential nutrient. And here's why. Even in Japan, they looked at 18 different municipalities in the Ueda Prefecture in 2011, and they found that the water that had more lithium gave life-extending effects to those people. And in the Miyazaki Prefecture, they found that there was a significance between lithium levels in the tap water and the average standard mortality ratio, meaning people lived longer, all-cause mortality less. So this is an important nutrient for us to know about. In Texas, thanks to Mineral Wells, Texas, they started looking at the water across this whole state. They sampled 3,123 lithium measurements in the public water supply relative to suicide rates in 226 Texas counties. And what they found was that there is an inverse relationship between how much lithium there is and the levels of suicide. So the more lithium, the less suicide. And I want to leave this map up here so you can see there is a very important thing when it comes to nutrition to know whether or not it's actually in your water and in your soil. And there are maps for us to know. And you can kind of see, you guys may actually have a red dot there, but it's not 100%. You're close to some red, but you may not be getting enough lithium in your water. And so we got to find other ways to make sure that you're getting that. Because this data was so profound, it showed that the more lithium there was, the less suicide, the less homicide, the less violent crime. So this was really important to understand. And to me, to know that we have so many people who are suffering so terribly that they are attempting suicide and they don't know about these nutrients, it just breaks my heart. And we want to make sure we're helping as many people as possible. Our veterans actually have a 57.3% higher rate of this. And so any of you out there who are watching this or know this, I will speak to a veteran, whether it's over Zoom or over the phone or in person, for free if they're struggling with mental health and suicidal ideation. But I want to leave this on this point that multiple studies of the drinking water have indicated that there's this inverse relationship with lithium. Several meta-analyses and systematic reviews studies from 9 countries and 3 continents all agreed that we need more lithium. The British Journal of Psychiatry said in 2020, after a meta-analysis, that there is a protective association with lithium intakes in the drinking water and suicide mortality. There are protection against not just the suicide and the depression, but now there are studies in countries showing a protection against things like Parkinson's and dementia. So we really want to be aware of whether or not we are getting some lithium if we are having any of these concerns. And the research is profound and it's global, and there's so much more that we need to learn about it. And people don't really realize this, but lithium carbonate is actually listed as an essential medication with the World Health Organization for bipolar disorder. That's how well it's been known. But I would say lithium carbonate is the medication. It's a very hard form of lithium. It's inorganic. And so they have to do higher levels of it, 900 to sometimes 1,500 milligrams a day. Whereas when you get it from other forms that are more natural, forms from water, for example, forms in food, things like lithium orotate, you can get a tremendous return on just 5 milligrams without the concerns in the back. So I'm just whipping through these slides because I just want to get to the very end and show you that lithium orotate is actually one of the best forms if you're looking for it to be able to utilize that. Okay, I'm going to exit out of that and stop the share and ask for one last teach back and see how we did today.
Well, if I may, I don't have a teach back, but I have a question. I had read about lithium in water, but it seems to be very level sensitive as to if you go beyond the point, it's poisonous. If not, it's great for you. I mean, is there a way to determine exactly what is good for you and how much is perhaps too much?
That's a really good question. And I do think it has a lot to do with the form. And in water sources, when we look at areas around the world who have the highest levels of these concentrations, that's the best indicator of what we're having as far as health conditions. I was also concerned when I had someone come to me with kidney issues because they had been put on a medication of lithium from 2 separate physicians, and one put the decimal in the wrong place. So they had an insanely high level of lithium carbonate, and that's why it's dangerous to the kidneys. There hasn't been any research on lithium orotate, even at the exceedingly high levels. I'm going to go back to that slide here and try to bring that up. And so it is something that it really is form dependent. And let's see here. It has a higher bioavailability. The body can use it more. And there's a lot of research showing that it's actually going to be better than, well, to my conclusion is that it's the best form other than water. Now, you asked about water. I don't know of any research that shows that there's damaging levels in water. And I want to bring the conversation back to it being a micronutrient. With any micronutrient, we want it to be balanced with other nutrients, right? So we think of monotherapies because that's how medicine works. They want to isolate everything out and just put this one component in, and that's what they did with lithium orotate. But when you get it in spring water, you're also getting magnesium, and you're also getting calcium, and you're getting it in the way that nature combines it for us, which helps your body balance it out. I will say that it does help with detoxification of heavy metals and toxic metals like mercury and things like that. So you may be experiencing some negative symptoms when you start to detoxify heavy metals that have no business helping the body. So sometimes people get confused and think that they're having an adverse response when it's just what we would call a Herxheimer response. Does that make sense?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, good. Now, always with everything, be cautious, right? And work with a healthcare professional because you never want to push just one mineral ever. Oftentimes what happened, like after COVID, so many people were like, well, zinc is going to kill all the viruses. So they took so much zinc. But when you take too much zinc and you don't balance it with copper, you create copper dumping in the body, which can create a mental health situation. Again, that's why I always am an advocate for getting it the way it occurs in nature through foods or in water, and then working with somebody to help you determine whether or not you're getting too much of one thing or another. Yes, doctor.
How would you test for deficiency for lithium and how would you supplement it? I know you mentioned spring water, but what's the source?
Honestly, I don't know of a test specifically that will tell you whether or not you're deficient because it hasn't been actually recognized as an official micronutrient that's needed for humans yet. So there's a lot of science to catch up to this. We're very young in the nutritional sciences in many ways, and this is one of them. But I will tell you that when they're on the medication, it takes about an hour and a half to get into the blood. And so they are looking at blood levels of whether or not it's going to be in a harmful range after that. So if you are taking the medication, you will be checking your blood to see if it's going to be that. Now you could, there's a doctor who wrote a book called The Promise of Lithium, specifically for Parkinson's. And he talks about sampling himself and then testing an hour and a half later. So that may be one of the best indications to see how much you can get into the blood. But then the trick is, not to overwhelm you guys, getting across the blood-brain barrier. And this is where I believe there's a magic synergy that should be explored even greater between things like the aranicines in lion's mane mushrooms and this mineral to see what we can deliver with them together to get effect. Clinically, I can say I have dozens of doctors across the country who've given me nothing but positive reports so far. But we do need to have more clinical studies that actually are measuring these specific metrics so that we can get a lot more information. When it comes to all nutrients, I do want to remind everybody, 100% of your RDA, which they say on these boxes, like remember total cereal, it gives you 100% of all of these things. That's the minimum that you need to get in order to developing an overt disease state. So we have no idea what the actual maximum is that we need to take in to satisfy all the physiological functions in our body every minute to replace all those cells. But what we do know is that when we get to a bare minimum, if we don't have it, we will have these disease states that have been learned to be associated with that. So we still have a lot to learn on what are the levels of vitality when it comes to nutrients. And the best thing to do, again, in my humble opinion right now, is to make sure you're getting them from whole food sources so that you're not throwing them out of balance and you're getting them in the way that nature provided them for us, because we are a part of nature. And we've got a long way to go, but hopefully together we'll learn and we'll get better and better at this as we continue to try to help as many people as possible. Front row.
I have heard of the benefits of mushrooms for a good while, but I'm curious, I know earlier in like the 2000s, they had a hard time with sourcing. So my question is, where are you sourcing your lion's mane? Is it grown in the US or are you shipping it from China? Or is it grown in like an indoor farm, or is it in the wild, or is it like getting grown in North Carolina? Like where
all very good questions because of everything we discussed today. Yes, I know some good companies that really have gone a long way to try to convince that the mushrooms from China are great. I'm just not fully convinced. Mine are actually going, I wish they were wild crafted, but they are grown specifically organically in Santa Rosa, California, actually not too far from you guys. And as I mentioned, the reason I selected this gentleman is because he's an award-winning. He's won awards years in a row for his ability to create really good quality mushrooms. So that's where I'm sourcing them from at the moment. I had these fantastical ideas of growing my own, and birch trees in Wisconsin and all of these things, but I'm not there yet. I still need help. And whenever I try something new, I always want to take my personal bias out of it. So I am, having a portion of my population that I'm observing and having clinical results with. But I have a dozen practitioners that I send these products out to, and I ask them for their feedback and seeing how the people are responding to it without my, instilled placebo on them about how great it is, And luckily, so far, I have had all positive returns from all of the practitioners. So that encourages me tremendously to continue to investigate it even deeper and see how much more it can do for people.
Okay, and just to piggyback on that too. So yes, of course, we all want to make sure that we're getting it from our diet, but if they do need a supplement, which some people do, or also because they're just like on the go or whatever, do you suggest, because you were saying that besides lion's mane being great for the brain and depression and anxiety, that it crosses the blood-brain barrier. So can that be used as a way to help when they're doing their supplementation? Like if they're doing their morning vitamin routine, should they be taking a lion's mane with it because it maybe helps to utilize it better? Or has there been any studies done with that?
That's a really good question, in fact.
Like maybe it boosts the turnover? I don't know.
I mean, quite potentially. Now, when I suggest that people do any of these supplements, I always tell them to take a couple of days off to let the body chemistry kind of catch up and balance out. And I love where you're going with that. I will answer that with with some interesting research I want to share with you, because we talk a lot about different forms of magnesium. And in fact, people really champion magnesium threonate as being the best to cross the blood-brain barriers. But there is a place called the Nutrition Innovation Center, and they look at whole foods versus these single isolated forms. And when they put two whole foods together, it was buckwheat and Swiss chard, they wound up getting higher levels of magnesium across the blood-brain barrier than even magnesium threonate up here. Now, that's not to say there's not value to threonate or citrate or glycinate, even though these are down here and not giving the best return. But what it speaks to is the complexity of food and how, when you get these things together, they're going to help bring greater synergy across the blood-brain barrier, because we need things like potassium and sodium and all of those that are going to be naturally in the food. So whenever you hear research about any nutrition, know that it's almost always about a single isolated form. And in fact, for them to be able to even determine what magnesium is in that Swiss chard and buckwheat, they would have to destroy it with solvents. And they still wouldn't even know what forms it was, because that just breaks up the chemistry. So it's very interesting to note that all of these are made from magnesium oxide treated with a synthetic to be able to try to figure out which is the best. But I'm telling you, my belief is the best is from food. and I think it shows up consistently that it's always going to be better to do that. So I know this is a long way to answer your question, but I do think that when we bring all of these pieces together, they do work better, and we get this 1 + 1 = 4, return, because there's still so many things in food that we don't even know are there. There's so many aspects of nutrition that we're missing. I use this example just to answer this one more time. There is a doctor, Tu who won the Medical Nobel Prize several years ago for curing malaria with a Chinese herb called artemisinin, anua, sweet wormwood. Tremendous, right? I mean, she won the Medical Nobel Prize. And then medical science wanted to find out what was the active component. So they did all this research, they distilled it down, they thought they isolated the active component, they put it into a medication, they gave it to people with malaria, and it did nothing. So we still have to respect that there is phytochemistry, there's microchemistry within the whole plants, the herbs and the foods that we aren't aware of yet, and they're helping us to make it work. Oftentimes, people will say that the greatest football player on the team is the quarterback. But if you put him on the field by himself, he can't do anything. He's definitely not going to win the game. He needs all the other players to be able to help him facilitate his function.
Okay, yes. One more, so to piggyback on that too. So from what you have learned, do you suggest people take the mushroom alone on an empty stomach in the beginning of the day? Or do you suggest that they take it with whatever they're eating? Do they compete, or do they also work synergistically together?
It's a good question. And it's food. And I put my mushroom in a whole food base of blackstrap molasses, because blackstrap molasses does provide a host of micronutrient cofactors in its balanced form, the way nature gave it to us. So I do have doctors who report that they feel that their mind is sharper over the course of the day if they take it in the morning. So it helps them to be more focused throughout the day. A lot of students who take it do feel that that's very helpful for them as well. And then, I actually have a form where I do blend it with lithium orotate, and that one I find helps people sleep at night, because it will take high GABA and bring it down to normal. So it'll help clear the excess, high glutamate. It'll take the high glutamate that makes your brain, like spinning at night, and it will clear it into the glial cells, and it will help create more GABA. So I do find it helps people with sleep to take it at night, if you're going to do that version.
So it's like adaptogenic then.
It's a great, you got it, you nailed it. Yeah. And in fact, it's such a smart mineral. They do show that it will take low levels of glutamate and normalize them. The same thing with dopamine and serotonin. So I do think we need to spend a lot more time being aware of whether or not we have a source of that for us.
Question.
Yes.
What if someone is already taking antidepressants? How does that affect the lion's mushroom? How would that affect, or any of these things as far as the chemical balance in that?
Wonderful question. So when I have people who come in and they are on an antidepressant, the conversation is, well, let's identify if you are missing all of the chemistry or any of the chemistry that's required to make your own serotonin, right? So we start with fortification, and you have to have nutrition for everything in your body. It's essential or you'll die. So we're using that as a means to make sure that we're fortifying them with all of the possible nutrition. Now, lion's mane mushrooms, there is no contraindication with that. It's just going to bring in that ergothioneine and other nutritional components that are going to help bring more balance to your body. Now, there are herbs that would be contraindicated. You know, for example, St. John's wort, they talk about how that reduces the efficacy of those. And so when it comes to herbal medicine, we have to be a little more cautious. But when it comes to nutrition, we have to remember all of even the drugs themselves are attempting to function based on the assumption that all of the chemistry is there. And we have to first make sure that we're fortifying that chemistry before we go any further, I think. So there is no contraindication in making sure you're bringing in balanced nutrition. Yeah. I'm so grateful for your time today, everybody. As you know, it's a difficult conversation to have around mental health, and I'm very pleased to hear that I don't know what to say, none of you, but many of you said you're not struggling with that. But I do encourage you to use whatever symptoms you are experiencing to help learn with Dr. Naz, you know, what are some of the things that may be low in your diet. I actually recently had my own blood work done, and it helped me discover that I wasn't getting enough selenium in my life. And so even somebody is, you know, as focused on it as myself needs an outside perspective to come and look at, you know, my labs and look at what I'm doing and help me to be the best version of myself. So I know that I gotta wrap this up, and I actually have to get going here in a couple minutes, but I just want to end on gratitude for all of you for showing up. There are people out there who are struggling, and they're struggling for a lack of knowledge. I'm not saying that it's up to you to share that knowledge with them, but when somebody does mention to you that they are struggling, it's important to do two things. Number one, validate them. You know, say, you know, what you're going through sounds hard, and then second, ask them if there's anything that you or they think they can do about it. And if that opens up the conversation to bring in nutrition, you know, let's go, let's do it. Yes, sir.
So, if I may, there's an incredible amount of information, unfortunately misinformation, that you can get on the web and the search.
Yes.
Do you recommend a particular website or websites, plural, that we can vet these informations? Because sometimes when I run into it, it takes so much time, there's so much pro and con, that we lose it. So what would you recommend would be a good source to vet the information and make sure it's on a correct source?
That's such a great question. And unfortunately, the answer is that we have to trust but verify on our own. We have to find out, are there multiple sources that are leading to this? We have to find out who's funding the site, who's funding the study, how many people were in the study. You have to learn how to study studies to use a study. And so Dr. Naz has something even more profound to bring to that conversation, because she can look at the studies, but then she can say, does this hold consistent with my clinical experience? And so having clinical experience is so profoundly important in a practitioner. So many people will listen to a TikToker or these people online, but do they have real world experience in seeing the holistic approach? There's a doctor down here in Laguna Niguel, California, who he and I meet weekly to do just that. We say, okay, here's what everybody's talking about. Let's look at the research. Let's see, does this hold consistent, not just in my clinic, but in your clinic, and why, right? And so we really try to dissect what is truth and what is just a trend or what is just sensationalized. That's an ongoing process. I wish I could give you a better answer, but Dr. Naz is going to be the filter I'm going to send you guys to help you determine what's truth and what's just marketing. Okay. Okay. All right, guys. I'm so grateful, and I know that I'll follow up with you later. I hope I get to be there in person next time. But
Look forward to that.
okay.
We appreciate very much, Mr. Strong. You are amazing, wealth of knowledge, and you taught us a lot today, and we're going to continue learning from you by watching your other YouTube videos and rewatching today's video as well. And I know I can speak for myself that I have many questions, but being mindful of your time as well. So thank you again very, very much. You're
Until
so
next
great.
time. Be
Until
well.
next
Thank you.
Thank you.